Abandoned ship. We're not caring about this car. We're thinking about the next year.
Exit clauses, yada yada yada.
Hulkenberg is the blue shell right now. Angle grinder guy, he gets a raise.
There you go.
Whoa.
He gets both salaries.
There you go.
What are they doing with the 5th and 6th seats?
Yeah, it's just Weenie Hut Formula One Junior now.
They don't fire up the same way that F1 cars do.
Gotcha. No homemade cookies for us. But what is homemade is our Formula One fan content. Welcome to the Tyred Boys podcast. I'm your host, Justin.
And I'm Aaron. Welcome back, everyone. We've got a fun episode recapping preseason testing this week. It was kind of a weird year, especially with the weather there at testing. Lots of rookies on track, of course, and so we're gonna get into how things shake out for that testing leading into the season. But Justin, happy to be back with you.
Happy to be back. Good to see you. It was a just a packed week. A lot of hours of running. I think it was like 2 4-hour stints. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, some limited running, due to like day one, there was like a power outage. Like, well, we could talk about that later. But yeah, overall, just like a packed test. We learned a lot. I think it was interesting, definitely different than some other tests that, we've been a part of while doing the pod. So yeah, lot to go through here. I know before we get into all like the nitty gritty of like what all the teams have brought, I know we have some quick hitters that we want to go through. So Aaron, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, so the first quick hitter that I had, it was something that we've kind of kept an eye on, and it came across my feed, and I found it interesting. But we're always kind of looking towards some of the up and coming drivers, women in motorsports, and just bringing the conversation about them and their involvement forward as well. So Haley Deegan was involved in the Indy NXT testing this year. She'll be driving. She'll be a full-time driver for the HMD Motorsports team. But what I found interesting when I came across her in particular is that this is her first time in open wheel racing. She has primarily done asphalt racing and some dirt track previously in the NASCAR Next Series. She started when she was like 15 or 16 years old, kind of came up through that NASCAR Next Series, and through her involvement there was in the K&N Stock Car Racing Series, where she was a multiple time winner. She has been a full-time NASCAR Truck Series driver for the past few years, and so now she is kind of moving more into that next opportunity for her from that NASCAR Cup Series into Indy NXT. And talking about women who have been in the Indy NXT series, Jamie Chadwick, who was last year the first woman winner in Indy NXT since 2010, is not going to be in the series this year. She's actually moved over to the European Le Mans series. When I saw that Haley Deegan was going to be involved, I'm like, oh, that's awesome. We'll have 2 women drivers in that field, but not the case for that. But still, some good opportunities, exciting driving with the IndyCar season coming up, as well as the European Le Mans for Jamie Chadwick, which I think has already kicked off and is in full swing at this point.
Gotcha. Yeah, and you were saying so Haley Deegan's up for like this year's Indy NXT series. Now, did the testing start or is that coming up?
So they did have their testing. I think it was this past week as well. So she was involved in that test, and then which is why it came up on my feed and everything. So she was a part of that test with the HMD Motorsport team, getting ready for the upcoming 2025 season.
Oh, okay, hell yeah. And Jamie Chadwick moving over to European Le Mans. That seems like a series that is pretty comfortably co-ed. You see a good number of female names there, at least over the years. So that's a great spot to get into. So yeah, happy to hear it. One female driver leaving the Indy NXT series, and another one stepping into their shoes. Probably not exactly, 1 to 1, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. So it'll be something that I'll just have kind of an eye out for, see if there's any good highlights and everything as we're watching and following along with the IndyCar series, kind of as a little side hustle to our main Formula One content and everything. But talking about a couple of the other women in motorsports that we've seen from the Formula One Academy series, I know you had a couple notes on some of our drivers and what they're going to be doing this year.
Yeah, and that was something I was really curious in. Last year's Formula One Academy was, I think, genuinely interesting, genuinely exciting. There was some good competition, at least among the top of the field. The top of which was the British driver Abby Pulling. Smoked the field pretty much like every weekend. Had some, had some contest, but yeah, overall was lights out, just really solid over the course. So I was very interested over the winter to see where somebody like that gets a drive. And she got picked up on a full, like I guess like a full drive, full ride. I don't know how you would say it. Off of her F1 Academy win with Rodden Motorsport in GB3. I am blanking. I believe Rodden won last year. The driver that they won with, I don't believe is continuing with them this year. But they picked up Abby Pulling and Bianca Bustamante, who Abby Pulling competed against last year in Formula One Academy. Bianca was a McLaren supported driver, had a couple of good drives, but overall, mostly like relegated to the midfield for the most part during the races that I watched. So interesting to see her getting picked up alongside Abby Pulling. I think it's a great shout early on in the season. Bustamante looked really strong. So yeah, a solid female duo getting picked up by the Rod Motorsport team for a new year in GB3. That's a very exciting pickup, I imagine, for Rodden and the drivers respectively. So yeah, just excited to see what she can do in that series. Again, another series that's like pretty solidly co-ed, and it's like through some of these signings that we're actually getting to learn like, okay, yeah, there's like seats available here and there and kind of all over the place for male and female drivers to slot in. We see a couple of like co-ed series that have been running very solid. So it's fun to check in on names like this because you end up learning about racing series that you may not have been privy to, and that's the case here for me with GB3.
Yeah, and so the Rod Motorsport team, like you said, they did win last year in
Yeah, that's what I
GB3.
thought.
So definitely a pretty exciting opportunity for both those drivers to be involved with a top caliber team.
Hmm.
It will be interesting because last year it looks like with the Rodden team they have so there's three seats that I guess for each team in GB3. So they had two drivers that drove the full season, and then there was a rotation kind of the third driver throughout the year for Run. I didn't see. I was trying to see if I could find it quickly, but didn't find what Ryan's full lineup will like the three starting drivers will be. So who will be with Bianca and Abby. But I think it's a really great opportunity, and kind of like you said, what we're looking to find out from where do these drivers who have success in F1 Academy, where are those next opportunities going to come from? the 2025 F1 Academy drivers lineups are out there as well. And so there are a couple of returning drivers, but it's also a lot of fresh faces as well. So there's a couple of the returning drivers being Chloe Chambers, who was with Haas last year. She's now supported by Red Bull Ford this season. Leah Block was another driver who was involved last year. She's with ART and being supported by Williams. Dorian Penn is still going to be involved as well, supported by Mercedes. So a couple of those returning drivers, Maya Vogue. But still a lot of new faces on that grid as well. So it'll be exciting to see throughout the year those drivers, how they progress, especially the new drivers getting that opportunity in the F1 Academy. Will be cool to see.
Yeah, I'm just excited for the like continuation of that series. Because yeah, the first first season being improved on by the second, getting to see some really solid driving, get to learn about some great up and coming drivers. Yeah, overall, I just think it's great value added for formula racing in general. It's nice to get like a mix of both here. So yeah, just a couple of names to keep our eye out on.
Yeah, and so another couple of names to keep watch for. Mario Andretti confirmed that Colton Herta is officially Cadillac's top prospect for their F1 seat, or one of their two F1 seats in 2026 coming in. So remaining at the top of that ladder for them. And I think that's the first official confirmation from someone involved with the organization that he is the top prospect. So looking to see who's going to fill that second seat. I'm sure there's going to be conversation throughout the year. We've heard Sergio Perez's name thrown out. I saw Sebastian Vettel's name thrown out here and there. I've seen lots of different drivers potentially for that second seat. So looking forward to seeing some of those lineups being solidified since they've already got a lot of the structure kind of put in place at this point for the Cadillac team with the team leads and whatnot. So that will be just something to keep an eye on for going into next season. And the last quick hitter of the day was the official confirmation of the Monaco Grand Prix being pushed to a two pit stop minimum, which I think is a great change based on what we've seen previously. There's rarely as much action on track or passing, and so mandating those pit stops when we saw last year kind of early red flag, team switch tires, and then the people up front just kind of milk their tires all the way through and make sure no one gets by them. I think this will be a nice change to ensure that things have an opportunity to be shaken up a little bit.
I'm withholding judgment either way. I think it hit my ear maybe positively at first, and then upon hearing some like arguments for either side, it is not exactly obvious whether this is going to be a good change or a bad change.
Well,
What I Go ahead.
what are those arguments on the other side? Because I feel like, especially just with that recency bias in mind, that makes it seem like a good idea. But I haven't seen too much on kind of the counterpoints to it.
So the one argument that was presented that could likely just be like covered off with like a rule tweaking is teams who would be in the mid to the backfield doing lap one pit stop, lap two pit stop, and then just like running whatever the hardest compound is to the end of the race, like they do anyway, and trying to like basically like cheese the top cars who are gonna have to make their pit stops like in very like razor thin margins because like
Mm.
that's often the conversation around pit stops is yeah, like you can come in at any time. The pit window's rather open. The thing that's the problem is what you get released into, right? Is it the same race that you were running, or is it a pack of cars that if we let you loose into there, it will just like it'll just ruin our run plan and like set us back.
Okay.
So the one is like cheese, effectively. The other, and this is the more interesting one to me, it may not be a problem for Monaco. It may end up being fine. The racing may like be just as exciting or whatever, but the point was brought up of like, well, will that open the door for other and they called it like ridiculous rules. Like,
Hmm.
why have these like weird one-off rules to like quote unquote create racing where it should just be like on merit and these kind of things. So I think that angle was a little more like, well, Monaco used to be this, so I don't know if we should change it. But it was also like, okay, well, if there's these one-off rules coming in for this track, what stops them doing it for this track and this track? And then in some way will racing become watered down because we're creating these rules. That was the one that was most interesting to me. Where yeah, like it may not do much here, but it could make way for some even more ridiculous choices down the line from the FIA, and that at least seemed reasonable and worth considering, which is why like I'm kind of withholding judgment and I'm like I kind of want to see the race before I say like was that value added or was that just like kind of hokey, you know?
Gotcha. I can understand that fear of a potentially slippery slope, but I don't think that this slope is that slippery.
Fair.
Monaco has already been treated to some extent as kind of a one-off race on the calendar to the point where people are contemplating year to year, oh, this is a legacy race at a historic track, but it's really not that exciting of a race. Like, do we keep it or not? Monaco's already in that one off category where I don't feel that there are that many other circuits that people have even brought up any kind of crazy one-off rules or something like, oh man, Spa is just really blah blah blah. And I think if there were a lot more opportunities for these one-off rules to be thrown in, okay, maybe that slope can be a little bit more slippery. But I can't think of any other circuits off the top of my head that would really incite someone to try and come up with a weird, peculiar rule. I think this is a we didn't do anything because it wasn't broken really. But then last year's race kind of broke the Monaco Grand Prix with a first lap red flag. Everyone changes their tires, and then everyone just milks it to the end. To be honest, I think that that cheese strategy maybe will enforce the top teams a bit more to actually push on their tires and try and push their pace as opposed to just coasting and keeping people behind. Because if a team does pull that cheese early on and there is a yellow flag or something like that that comes later on in the race, that really could hurt them if they haven't put themselves in good racing position throughout the race up until that point. Um, So I think kind of holding our judgment until we see how it goes is a good idea. But um, I don't anticipate that this will blow up in their faces. Famous last words, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah, I think that's a good point where there's not too many other tracks that have a um I guess you could use the word like complexion. They don't have a complexion similar to the Monaco Grand Prix that would feel like at this juncture other one-off rules would be like quickly coming down the pipeline. I think that's
Right.
pretty reasonable. You're right. But yeah, overall, it just like it's one of those things that feels like there would be ripples outside of like even like what my concept of thinking is. So I'm like, I just want to see what happens because
Yeah.
I don't even think I fully understand what happens if you add in like a planned pit stop. Like we've seen races here or there where like things get shaken up and can we tell if like a team switched from like a two-stop plan to a one-stop plan, like these kind of things. But I don't know if I fully understand what added pit stops into a race do all of the time. If anything, I'll say this, like I'm kind of excited for it. I'm excited to see what a rule like this could do. Is it is it too much? Does it feel too constricting? Or does it open up just enough like competitive choice that makes it like really interesting? Oh, like the point that you brought up, like where we're seeing top teams being punished for what used to be like the metagame of Monaco. It's like, no, like actually now you have to push and like find that really good window to get your car back into. If it creates like interesting and dramatic choices, yeah, I mean, I could be all for it. I'm just excited to see what the teams do with a mandate like this.
Yeah, and I'm sure leading up to the Monaco Grand Prix, we'll have more conversations about that as
Hmm.
well. I think the pit stop strategy will be very interesting because people won't be choosing that strategy based on tires being dead necessarily, because the tires should be fine, especially if you're mandating a second pit stop. Um,
Hmm.
so I think that'll be exciting to see when we get there in the season, and an interesting thing to look out for. But to move over to the F1 testing sessions we had this past week, before we fully hop over that, wanted to just remind you, if you're listening, if you are watching along, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us on our Twitter page, TikTok. We've added on. We'll be posting some episode clips there. Anywhere you get your podcasts, our YouTube, if you want to see the video and our smiling faces. But we appreciate everyone for taking the time to listen with us.
New episodes every now Tuesday after every Formula One race, after the any of the Formula One events. I got myself all tongue tied now. Just let your friends know new content after every race. Back to the episode.
Alrighty, so getting into our testing sessions that we had this week, it was a little bit different than we've seen in previous years. Of course, they do the morning and afternoon testing sessions, so you get some different temperatures on the track. This year, though, overall was just a lot colder than it's been in previous years, which I think will provide different data than teams have been or may have been looking for. We had temperatures that were reaching into at most the mid 60s Fahrenheit over the testing days, but all the way down into the 50s as well. Where for the first race of the season in Australia, current predicted weather is looking to be in the low 80s. So I think the way the cars reacted during the testing sessions, the data they got from the tire compounds and whatnot, will vary in terms of its usefulness for that first race of the season. And of course, as we're getting further and further on, cars will be bringing upgrade packages, things will be changing, and that testing data won't be as valuable, say, for a late season Las Vegas Grand Prix where the temperatures at night may be similar to that testing. By then, a lot of these cars may be completely different from what we're starting at here for the season.
Yeah, that's an interesting angle to think about, when like when and how, or no, it's like, what does this information that the teams are getting, like, what does it inform? And I think you're nailing it, where because of the temperature differences to A, like what it normally is, and then B, like what the expected conditions are going to be at the time of whatever that Grand Prix is. Yeah, I think you're like dead on, and I'll even go one step further to say I don't think any of the data that they got here helps them, like, directly for Australia. I don't think it does. I don't think this data correlates to anything that they'll be expected to see when the race in Bahrain like actually rolls around. So weirdly, it feels like the data that they were gathering would have been very isolated. It feels like they would be looking at like car behavior just generally, as opposed to like car behavior here at this track and maximizing like for a race uh, that is would be like in 3 weeks time at that location, because that's like a big key difference is last year, and if I remember correctly the year before, we went from Bahrain preseason testing
Mm.
to season opener in Bahrain as the first race of the season. So all the teams would have been stayed in like, it's a whole different setup to the season. So interestingly, yeah, they get a very tight window of data gathering, and it isn't going to be that useful for anything like specific down the line. What it feels like we're going to get is a whole bunch of teams that all have cars that are going to work under different conditions, to the degree that we're going to see, like, all right, like cold, whatever. I'm not even going to go through all the examples, but just it feels like the cars are going to be strong at different tracks, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that a little bit previously. Last year, the colder weather tracks seemed to work well with the Mercedes car and the Mercedes package. It's kind of built around Silverstone and the conditions there, which are usually a little bit cooler, damper than some other places. We saw the Mercedes cars do very well at the Las Vegas Grand Prix, taking P1 and P2 last year with George and Lewis up front. So there's always, or maybe not always, but there could very well be some of that variation with certain teams maximizing better in those colder temperatures. But I think the other part of the testing session that really does benefit the teams in terms of the data that they were getting. They may not be getting the best tire data or lap time data and whatnot for the Bahrain race, but we saw a lot of the teams using the FlowViz paint on the cars, that fluorescent powder mixed in with oil to see how the aerodynamics are flowing around the car. And I think that is, of course, a positive in terms of data. You're being able to compare those aerodynamics from the live on-track car to your wind tunnel data, to your sim racing data. You can make sure that things are working the way that they're supposed to be, and if they are, you can utilize that data to continue to just try and maximize and max out this last year of the regulations of that fine tuning and improvements even though some of those may be more minor throughout this year, um, to make those improvements throughout the year and really see how those aero packages are working.
Yeah, and you're hitting on the like if you hear the team principals or any of the engineers that they'll interview, like you'll hear them talking about like correlation, and that's exactly what they're talking about. You're right where the data that they're gathering, they are seeing, and this is crazy to me. I don't know if I fully like understand this concept, but it's the idea that they are testing that their equipment used to test their car is like right. And if they believe they are scanning a square, the 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 data and the testing equipment also believes that yes, it is a square that has been scanned, and we are all agreement that this is a square. So it's like getting, like you were saying, the wind tunnel, the on track data, the sim data. It's trying to get that like, okay, here's what we have, here's what we believe it should look like. Does it look like that? And if not, why? Is it is it on the car problem, or is it the way we are going about collecting our data? And that to me is like more fascinating than anything that they put in their cars. It's like the process by which we gather information needs to be assessed to make sure the data that we are gathering is in fact the data we want to be gathering. It's
Yeah.
just like mother like wild the lengths that they go to make sure that they can like trust what their senses are reading, trust what they're like what feedback they're being given. So you're right. Even if it doesn't help them for Bahrain in 4 months, what it is, it's allowing them to understand their car better than just in the wind tunnel or in the sim, right? It's trying to put all of those things together and mesh them into like one on track reality with the with the driver behind it. So that's like really what's going on at testing. That's like the look behind the lens. It's like, yeah, we're talking about temps and tires and run plans and fuel and all of this, but at the end of the day, what they're really making sure is does this work, and is the data that we're gathering correct and proper for the direction that we're trying to go.
Right. And especially with the limited amount of wind tunnel time that they have throughout the year, wasting time in the wind tunnel at the very beginning of the season to confirm that their simulation and their CAD designed parts for the car and everything are working the way that they intend them to, is kind of a waste of some of that wind tunnel time when there is that limitation. If everyone could just be in the wind tunnel as much as they want and everything, testing out this part and that part and seeing how it all flows together would be a different story. But yeah, I think that utilization of testing to collect some of that data and of course get the drivers out and getting the data from the drivers about how they feel in the car. After the first day of testing, Max was talking to the media a little bit and said that the car, he was pretty happy with it in terms of just the drivability, that it was responding the way that he expected it to when he was putting the inputs in, that it was doing kind of everything that it was intended. It felt comfortable. It was predictable, and that of course is huge for these drivers. We've seen a number of drivers that have struggled when cars are unpredictable or difficult to drive. Even some of the best of all time, Lewis Hamilton, struggled over the past couple of years at numerous times with the Mercedes car, and it just not working the way that they expected it to, or not feeling comfortable in it, and seeing that frustration come out from the drivers, of course, negatively impacts the team, their own driving, and all of those things. So getting that data from the drivers themselves is also huge, especially for those rookie drivers and young drivers who don't have that much experience. They're getting a feel. We saw Kimi Antonelli out there pushing the Mercedes to the limits, taking some spins, but because he was testing out kind of the limits of that car after uh, a very short career in Formula cars because of kind of jumping up through so quickly. So a good opportunity for those drivers to get a feel and get some good data for the teams.
Yeah, and I think pointing out the rookie drivers is a big difference in this year's test as well. Is there's a lot of younger drivers who haven't had as much time behind the wheel of a Formula One car. The reason we have to say that is an increased amount of like exposure for some of the quote unquote rookies that are on the grid this year. But yeah, Antonelli is a good shout. I think kind of the epitome of progress, if you will, over the week. Like we saw early the first day, lock up here, lock up there, lock up, a couple of spins here, but as the week of testing went on, he grew more confident and more consistent. And by the time his full race distance came, he seemed to do quite well. So he was actually one of my surprises, one of the individuals that I was looking at. It was a big shout for Mercedes, them going with like a young driver as opposed to just somebody else. And I remember being maybe skeptical of the choice. So I had my eye on Antonelli specifically during the test, and yeah, he was definitely interesting to watch. But yeah, just key exposure for the younger drivers on the grid, just giving them that time in the cockpit and just getting comfortable with the just like how the car works. I know the wheels specifically are much different than Formula 2, Formula 3, and Formula 4 wheels. So just like learning what all of the inputs do, getting that like feedback from the engineer of like this mode, that mode, all of these things, all of this stuff is what gets hammered out in your preseason testing, and the time around it. So yeah, just a lot to think about for the young drivers. But yeah, overall, it seemed like they were getting on great.
Yeah, I think there were definitely some highlights for a number of those drivers. On day one, Gabriel Bortoleto had the Kick Sauber up in 12th. Of course, there were some drivers on different plans, different kind of run plans and whatnot, maybe not going for some of those faster laps. The Haas cars had some struggles throughout the week with their car, but um, overall, we had a lot of good running. Day one was a little weird. We had a little bit of rain, which also similar to those colder temperatures during the day, not as common in Bahrain in the desert. We saw, like you said, a power outage that caused the red flag that ended up adding some additional time later in the evening for the testing running where they were out under lights a little bit. So some good opportunities to get some different feels throughout the week with the testing sessions, but a number of highlights with those younger drivers. Antonelli, Bortoleto, being a couple that had some pretty good times that they put out there.
The other thing I wanted to go back to, you had brought up the Flow Viz paint. I'm gonna ask you what your thoughts on the McLaren show was. Do you believe that that was exactly what they said it was? Because that was a big show of a car covered in paint, where like you usually don't see that like they said on the broadcast, you usually see like one or two sections painted, usually just one side of the car. They loaded up like half, like one full side of the car. The more I've thought about it, and the more they keep saying like, "Oh, you know, McLaren didn't want anybody to see this." Well, guess what? Formula One TV's got it, so that means the whole world has it. So here's what I got to. I think my tinfoil hat somehow crept its way on. So I'm like, is that all just like a show? Were they like, was that like a misdirect?
I think it was a to be honest, I think it was just a mistake. I think
Hmm.
that someone, they were like, oh yeah, we want to collect this data, we want to get a good idea, and instead of doing it in segments, someone was like, well, why don't we just do it all at once? And no one was like, oh, I don't know, like we've never done that before. Why would we like do it now? I think that it was a mistake. I don't think that it was a attempt to flaunt their car in front of everyone or to misdirect, because after they realized and pitted, they were trying their very best to block off any cameras from seeing the car and seeing how that uh, paint had kind of washed with the arrow on the car and everything. So I think someone slipped up. They were a little
Hmm.
groggy after the winter break and came back and just were a little too gung ho on their data collection.
Damn, that's a really measured take. See, I got myself all worked up into like a damn dude. This is like prestige levels of misdirection here. I was convinced that there's some puppet master behind the scenes
I don't
orchestrating it
know.
all.
Maybe they're throwing out some false flags to lead people to question what they actually saw. So maybe that's a little bit of red herring that they're putting out there. Zach Brown's on his burner account being like, "Oh yeah, no, that wasn't what we were doing." Da 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 da. I don't know. But I feel like mistakes happen, and I think that is, in my mind, what happened there. Especially the way they reacted after they kind of, I don't know, maybe they saw some of the other cars that weren't fully covered in the paint and were like, oh crap, we shouldn't have done that. Or they saw the marks of the paint on the car and were like, oh, now everyone can see exactly what our car does. Um, yeah, and especially having the best car at the end of last year, I think that is not data that they would intend to share with everyone. But those high def cameras from the F1 TV can't catch them slipping.
No, definitely not. That's dude, that's why my brain did so many like gymnastics trying to like figure out what went on there. Like was it just a hiccup or was there something much more sinister at work? But yeah, I'll let my fan fictions rest here for the
I
minute.
there's a saying that I'm gonna butcher here that I think can describe it, and it's something to the effect of, "Don't attribute to malice what can be attributed to incompetence." So I think you could change malice to like being intentional and say don't assume that they were doing it on purpose, and they could have just been dumb. So we'll see, but I think that's the story that I'm sticking to for that.
Yeah, fair enough. Now, the other thing that interests me about the test is, yeah, you get the correlation data. Yeah, you get you get the rookies, but I'm interested in because I can't tell myself looking from one year to another year to this year, I can't tell the difference between this year's car and last year's car. There was the whole kerfuffle about the pink Mercedes, and I was like, I don't get it. It just I don't get it. It looks like every other car here. That car looks like this car, and this car looks like that car. So I need to be shown all of the new sticky uppy bits, or else I won't believe that they're new cars, right?
Okay.
So there were a couple of like tech things that really stood out. I think these are like very minor. I don't know what these changes necessarily do. I understand a lot of them to be like aerodynamically driven, but a couple of the teams bringing some new sticky uppy bits and some new parts to their car. And if you don't mind, I would like to tell you about some of the more interesting ones.
Sure, go for it.
All right. So what we learn, I'll just start at the top of my notes here. What we learn about the Red Bull is it's a very, very similar concept to last year's car. And if you look down the grid, what you'll actually learn is a bunch of teams are copying that style. They call it like an overbite side pod. So you'll see a bunch of that design on the cars, which is to mimic what the 2024 Red Bull was doing, figuring that that side pod configuration seems to be maximizing that area of the car. So we see a lot of cars going that way. But while the Red Bull looks similar, we find in like general concept, we find some of the areas like significantly changed underneath. So while the car looks similar, a lot of like the cooling has changed, some of the ductwork has changed, some of the way they've like outfitted the nose cone has changed. So interestingly, the Red Bull under the skin types of changes for a relatively similar to 2024 concept. A team that's bringing like big change. This was probably something you were privy to, the Ferrari front suspension change, going from a push rod concept to a pull rod front suspension concept. There's largely like aerodynamic reasons for this, is what I understand. You lower the center of gravity for the front of your car, helps out in a variety of ways there. But what it also does is make repairs and maybe changes much more difficult because I've heard the word gubbinses. Those bits are like way lower down in that nose cone, so it like takes a little more engineering to get to. But um a foundational change there for the Ferrari and the way they set up the front of their car. So that's interesting. For the Mercedes, some changes here and there, but what something that is on their car that I haven't seen on the other cars is this like front gap that has like a cover with a hole in it. And I think
Hmm.
that's for like some type of adaptable cooling where they can either remove that flap, put it in, maybe like adjust the aperture inside to like let more air into the front nose cone. So possibly something about like driver cooling going on there. Does an interesting bit from the Mercedes, and then the Aston Martin, which I was looking very very closely at them as a team. Had very limited running. We see both of the drivers like sick or not doing so hot. So as far as like a test goes, Aston Martin was struggling on the like on track time side of things. But what they are doing with their design, if you look at their shark fin, they're messing with like little cutouts and different angles, what would you say, different degrees of angles to see what kind of aerodynamic gains they get there. So you'll see a starkly different like shark fin area of the Aston Martin down the back of the car. So I thought that was very interesting. And last but not least, the thing that like was so crazy as far as like bodywork goes and like concept goes was the Haas, what was it, like late in day three where their like whole side pod peeled off. You got to see what the monocoque, the chassis looks like. You get to see all of that. So that was fascinating. And a quote from the team, I don't even know what this means. That's why I'm bringing it up to you. It's like this is way above my pay grade. They said what happened was a delamination of the honeycomb on the car, and that's what happened. It's like, oh, okay, gotcha. What
Oh
does any
yeah,
of that mean?
gives so much information, but
I know.
um, yeah, and I think it started at kind of the uh, engine cover right behind the head and then worked its way down the side pod as the car kept going, with the air just ripping at that basically. But I imagine the honeycomb would just be maybe the way that they fasten those pieces, or maybe a some sort of adhesive that they use. So
Hmm.
delamination sounds like something just not sticking the way it's supposed to anymore. So I don't think they really gave much valuable data, but yeah, definitely a bizarre thing to see, with that really ripping off pretty heavily. Um, Pretty much the only major issue that we saw for any of the cars across testing, I would say, which I think
Oh yeah, for
is
sure.
pretty um, nice to see. I think that may be a bit different next year with the new engines and all, but the reliability of the engines and of just the cars and their structure and all themselves, very rarely has some of these more extreme issues that come up. So um, definitely a standout moment for the Haas team from the weekend.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully that's something that they're able to get shored up by the time they get to Melbourne. Because yeah, that seemed like pretty fundamental as far as like issues going wrong. So yeah, I had to bring that up as far as like car things, and then the last thing I'll say as far as like innovation and changes. Look around the mirrors of your favorite driver's car, and you may see some new aerodynamic elements, ways to just generate more downforce on the car and maximize speed. You'll see teams like Kick Sauber have been experimenting with like their mirror setups. I think Williams also has changed the way their mirrors look. So teams looking at every angle possible here. So yeah, just some of the changes that stuck out to me with the help of A1 Sam Collins. He has an improved eye for this stuff, so we use the help of F1 TV to help us to understand all of the changes and find out at the nitty gritty of what's going on. So just some aerodynamic bits that I wanted to tell you about. And to quote Sam Collins, this was like, oh, okay, I understand. To quote Sam Collins, he says the Formula One cars are closer to aviation or aerospace equipment than it is to like traditional road cars that we would think of. And that I think cracked my skull just wide open, just knocked me right down to the ground because I was like, my God, these are like these are rocket ships effectively. These are like plane engines is what it feels like sometimes when you see him going around the track. So for him to say it so succinctly, I wanted to bring that to you because yeah, I think that's going to live in my head for a long time now.
Yeah, and I mean we've seen to some extent we've seen that, and that's part of the reason for the downforce. Just a couple of years ago, we saw Fernando Alonso in I believe it was an Alpine ramp off the back of Lance Stroll, where they were comparing his kind of launch angle and how high the front of his car was to an airplane taking off. So I think that's definitely an interesting comparison. These cars just have downforce instead of lift that they're trying to capitalize on, like an airplane. But I think that's a perfect, simple way to just put it for the layman who's watching along with the testing and everything. Um, but looking at the testing, at the results that we had, I wanted to talk about, and we wanted to talk about some of the like expectations and some of the surprises and whatnot that we had. So for me, I felt like the Ferrari and the Kick Sauber were kind of the two standouts of working as expected for my viewing experience. Kick Sauber kind of being on the bottom of the totem pole, which I expected, with their fastest times being good enough for P18 and P19. And then the Ferrari on the other side being up towards the top. They were very competitive. At the end of the year, of course, with that changeover from Lewis Hamilton moving and taking Carlos Sainz's place with the team, I felt like the only testing surprise with Ferrari was that the fastest time was put by Lewis Hamilton over Charles Leclerc, who is more experienced with the Ferrari team, of course, over the past few years. However, like you said, with that fundamental change of how the car works, how the car drives, that maybe allowed Lewis to adapt a little bit better to the car, with that push rod being kind of the same style that the Mercedes had been running. So switching that up, I think maybe threw Charles's speed off just a little bit, helped Lewis out, but the Ferraris nonetheless looked really solid on the weekend. And the other one, which is kind of more of a worked as expected based on conditions, was the McLaren. Last year, we were briefly talking about the Las Vegas Grand Prix and temperatures and whatnot being comparable to this testing. And the McLaren car struggled pretty significantly at Las Vegas. So in those kind of quali time setting sort of runs that the McLaren was doing, they end up being down in P8 and P13 for their fastest times on the weekend for Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris. So not as high up on the timesheet as we would have anticipated, I think, for the McLarens. Lando did set the fastest lap on day one. However, that was I believe the same lap that was only good enough for that P13 at the end of the weekend.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, so interesting. So seeing like similar performance out of McLaren as you do like when the temperatures were, if the temperatures are comparable.
Yeah. So
Mm.
kind of working, as anticipated in the temperatures, and of course maybe they weren't running as many of those quality type runs. Maybe they were trying different tire compounds, trying different setups and things like that, to get that idea of how the car and any of the changes from the off season are working. Of course, testing is not a qualifying session, so there's only so much that you can. You have to take things with a grain of salt a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
or a grain of sand, I guess, in Bahrain. But
Yeah.
my my big surprises, I guess, one, Williams, they were way further up the grid in the timesheets than I anticipated. In particular, with Carlos Sainz setting the fastest time of testing throughout the week. Um, that was a pretty big shock. I'm not gonna say Williams is all the way back yet, but they might be all the way back. But no, even Alex Albon, P6 for his best time, is a really solid performance from the Williams squad. And I am hoping to see that same performance kind of carry through. I think that would be exciting with the two veteran drivers in their lineup. But my other surprise was just that Haas was a bit further down. I know it was two drivers. I know they had some issues throughout the week with the car, but I did anticipate them looking a little stronger based on their trajectory last year. as opposed to being down in that bottom rung of driving with P17 fastest time for Esteban Ocon and P20 for Oliver Behrman.
Yeah, and I was curious about Haas. It seemed like they were doing more like high fuel loads, longer runs. Definitely running different than the other teams at the test this year. So they were a standout in that regard, where it didn't seem like they were doing as much performance running as some of the other squads.
Yeah, and so not really what I was anticipating or kind of looking for with them. But like you said, the probably different scenarios, run testing and whatnot for the team, but definitely a little bit of a surprise, especially with kind of the quality of driver that Esteban Ocon, a race winner, you would think would bring to the team, and Oliver Behrman, who performed very admirably last year in his stand-in drives that he had. So I didn't think that they would be bringing up the rear there, but again, have to kind of not base too much off of the testing results.
For sure. Yeah, I would tend to agree. Haas, yeah, a bit of a surprise. I have to agree with you on the Williams angle. That was one of my surprises as well. Just showing up real hot, unexpected, man. I was not ready to see science at the top of the table in a Williams. My reality was shifting. I felt worlds colliding. I was unsure as to what might be happening. Like was Jupiter in retrograde? I had to
Well,
call my Swami and wonder, you know.
he had to prove that Ferrari made the wrong choice to take Lewis over him. So he's like, I've got to just put a better time in than Lewis, and Lewis finished second. So there's really only one spot to go for Carlos there.
Well, hey, he nailed it. So yeah, I'm with you. Williams, big surprise for me. Also, Alpine. I really liked what Alpine brought to the table. They were up further on the timing tables than I would have expected.
Mm,
It showed me that what we saw at the end of 2024 was indeed part of like a progress forward. They are value adding to the concept that they have, and it wasn't just like a small little window that we saw from Alpine. So really pleased with what they brought to the test. So yeah, that was quite surprising for me. I don't know if like I forgot where they were at the end of 2024, but seeing them in those positions on the timing tables was like refreshing and yeah, not what would have been on my bingo card. As far as what would have been on my bingo card was McLaren looking strong. I know their times weren't cracking the top, but I did not see really like one iota of a problem.
yeah.
Drivers didn't seem uncomfortable to any degree. The car looked solid, out on track. Didn't look like it was having any issues. From what I understand, they got through their run plans just as expected. So yeah, I think as far as Tesco for McLaren, this is just right where they wanted to be, coming, obviously hot off of last year. They're not like trying to see, are we competitive this year like they were last year? It's like, no, no, we are title defending McLaren now, and they kind of looked like it on track, which as I said, was kind of as expected, and I'm happy to see it.
Yeah, and like you said, they got through their plans. They were kind of in the middle of the pack in terms of their laps that they got through on track. Um,
Hmm.
so I think they definitely will be coming into the season looking as the favorite for the constructors championship again. In particular with that same lineup, two strong drivers with Piastri and Lando there. Um, so yeah, a kind of casual testing week for the McLaren squad.
Well, it looks casual to us.
Right. Yes. Which is what I think you would hope. If it doesn't look casual to us, then something may have gone drastically wrong.
Sure. Sure, sure, sure.
But yeah, so the overall testing, in terms of laps that teams got in, Mercedes and Haas were up at the top of the board with 458, 457 laps done. Racing Bulls with 454 just behind. And like you said, the Aston Martin with their struggles. And then Red Bull as well, at the bottom of the number of laps done. Red Bull only did 304 laps. And Aston Martin did 306. So some 800 kilometers less driving than the top teams there. But again, I don't see, at least for Red Bull, having not gotten what they needed to done. Liam Lawson has a little more experience as a young driver than some of the other drivers in the field. So I think that kind of plays to that as well. Um, Not necessarily needing quite as much time to get adjusted in the car.
Yeah, I think that's pretty reasonable seeing or like surmising where maybe some of the lack of laps might come from. Could be comfort, could be, yeah, if our planes just finish, we're running less than other teams. That's always tough to put your finger on, but yeah, I'd say that's like a fair assessment.
Yeah, and so the kind of final little fun segment that I wanted to throw in was just kind of a blind expectations for where we think and our predictions for where things are going to shake out for this season. Um, I will have to see if I can put it up on screen to simplify it, but I'm gonna go ahead and give you my uh, 1 through 10 for the constructors, and then we'll see kind of how ours compare to each other. But for number one for the constructors, I am coming in hot with a Ferrari Constructors Championship. I think that with Lewis and Charles, it's going to be a really strong pairing. The Ferrari looks good, and if they can keep up that pace and fight with McLaren like they had at the end of last season, I think it could be a very very tight final or top two there for that. Kind of giving away my second in that constructors being McLaren. Um, for third, I have Mercedes and Red Bull fourth. I think that Liam Lawson is going to have his share of struggles throughout the year. I don't think he's going to have a bad year, but I would imagine it would be kind of in a similar vein to what we saw with Checo last year, potentially with him having his first year in the team and not in the most dominant car, most likely. But I can imagine that third and fourth being pretty close. Then after testing, my predictions got shaken up a little bit. So I have Williams in fifth in the championship, Alpine sixth, Aston Martin seventh, Racing Bulls eighth, Haas ninth, and Kick Sauber 10th.
So your big hot take is that Ferrari wins the championship, the constructors championship.
Yes, that
Are you
and
even
I'd say
venturing a
Williams.
guess as to who wins the drivers?
Oh, I made a full list for the drivers too.
Ah, interesting. Okay, gotcha. But you believe number one is going to be Ferrari. You're liking what Leclerc and Lewis are bringing.
Yeah, I think that Ferrari and McLaren were very competitive towards the end of last year without some of the different hiccups both sides had throughout the season. I see that just being a very tight constructors fight. But I also think the drivers' championship is going to be very tight as well. So I think there's potentially a few names that could take the championship this year in the drivers.
Interesting. Okay, so tell me, so at least just tell me like who's the top 10 for the drivers?
So for P1, which you might think it doesn't make sense, but in my mind it does. I have Max Verstappen P1, even with Red Bull fourth in the constructors. I have Leclerc second, Lando third, Lewis Hamilton fourth, Oscar Piastri fifth, George Russell sixth, Liam Lawson seventh, and Kimi Antonelli eighth, Alonso ninth, and Sainz 10th.
Interesting. Yeah, tell me what world we exist in where Max wins the drivers, but they are fourth in the constructors. Is this like a really tight top four where it's like separated by like 5 to 10 points?
It would have to be pretty close, I think, for it to happen. But it's in a world where Max won the title by 63 points last year and came in third in the constructors' championship. So I think that if the constructors is pretty tight, there's still some potential for that to work out. And my bias had to shine through at least a little bit. So
I would say your bias is shining through significantly on that one. But hey,
on that one, I
four-time winner, like that's fine. It's
it's
not like it's out of nowhere.
it's hard to. It's one of those things where when someone is that dominant for a number of years, it's hard to bet against them specifically. Red Bull as a team, on the other hand, like we saw last year when they don't have the best car, Max still managed to make it work for the drivers, but the Constructors' Championship fell away from them pretty heavily at the end of the season there. So, yeah, maybe a little surprising of a way it could end up, but I'm looking forward to seeing how my predictions shake out at the end of the year. If I'm anywhere close, completely off base, either way, it was kind of fun to put the list together. So
Yeah, either way, just happy to be here. No, that's okay. I gotcha. So maybe just a more extreme version of what happened in 2024.
a little bit.
Maybe I can get behind that. Um, I don't have a full 10 in my mind, so I'll just do the top three. For Constructors' Championship, I'm gonna reckon that it's the same as last year. I'm gonna guess McLaren, Ferrari, Red Bull.
Okay.
Um, and then for the Drivers' Championship this year, I'm gonna put, I'm locking a bet in like today for end of the year. I have to, I gotta hand somebody $200 and tell them my vote. I'm putting my money on Lewis Hamilton.
Okay. I like
Yeah,
it.
to win in Ferrari red, I think that is like I think that's what our hearts want. It seems like that's like the vibe. It seems like that's what we're like all trying to spirit bomb the script writers for. Even Lewis himself is doing it, you know. He feels invigorated. If Lewis is invigorated, then I'm invigorated. This is how
Yeah.
I feel. So yeah, that's where I'm putting my 200 bones. I'm saying Lewis wins it right now.
There you go. All right. I love it. I think that's a great pick. I think really I genuinely think that there could be five, potentially six people that are in that strong fight, like from Max down to George on my list. I think that there's a lot of talented drivers with some really competitive cars, so things could be or it could be a pretty chaotic and very exciting season. That's what we're hoping for. We love the excitement. We like good on track battles, some drama in it for us all. I don't think any team or driver is going to run away with the championship this year. So a lot of racing ahead, and I am, for one, pumped to be here for it.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to Melbourne. A couple of weeks away yet, but yeah, Formula One back in full swing. I think this testing was interesting. You could tell, and I'm just saying this so I can say the headline. I learned now after the 3 days, like what they mean when they say a evolution year versus a revolution year, right? Like it what happened should be expected. This is what I'm getting at. It should be expected that cars are having little reliability troubles, pretty solid confidence from the drivers in the car, teams not feeling like out of the water in any regards. Because at the end of the day, and I think this is what my brain forgets, is we're 4 years. This is the fourth
Yeah.
year on these regulations, so it would make sense that the teams like kind of have it figured out by now. What they believe to be the best concepts for their car in the right way, like to set them up and just go about racing for their team. So I think it finally got hammered into my very dense skull here of like what should be going on and like okay, these are like expectations versus reality, that kind of thing. So in that regard, yeah, I think I learned a whole lot from this testing, honestly. Maybe more than other years. Maybe if not about the cars themselves, maybe just like just adding on a nice layer of info for the coming year. So yeah, I think testing was great. But I don't really have any other notes that I wanted to hit on as far as like, technology changes or team changes, anything like this. Did you have any final thoughts as far as like testing is concerned?
No, not really. But I think that the way you're I don't know if it's necessarily beating it into your brain. I think that this is just kind of the culmination of you being a an avid watcher and fan for a full set of regulations. So you got to see it early on and kind of carry all the way through to where we are now. We've seen the side podless Mercedes and all the iterations of that car since then that have come through this downforce era. But yeah, I don't have anything else to tack on here at the end other than our cool down lap for this week.
That sounds great. Tell me what you got. We got rose. No, we got flavor of the week this week for the people. What is on your flavor of the week, Aaron?
So for my flavor of the week, for my food, Colleen and I, we went out for a little date night this past week. I didn't want to cook, and I was like, let's go grab dinner somewhere. Where do you want to go? We tried a place we haven't been before that has some good surf and turf dishes, but I had a just slamming crab cake sandwich there. It was phenomenal. Very entertaining collection of characters at the restaurant bar slash restaurant as well. We had a couple sitting next to us who were pretty entertaining and kind of chatted us up periodically while we were there. They were definitely regulars, knew the bartender by name, and were having a
Love
good
it.
time. So that was a pretty just fun experience. We'll definitely be back. I want to try some of the other good stuff that was on the menu there. For my music this week, my music always my vibes change based on weather, time of year, and when that good weather hit, the country music was in full swing. once I could just crack the windows on my Corolla just a little bit, I was like, oh, this is so nice. It's light out by the time I get home from work. It's like it was warm enough for me to not be in my full winter coat and everything. So it was just a nice little burst of some country music with the nice weather. And my visual medium for this week is Survivor. It is back. Colleen and I are big Survivor fans, and I was excited for that show to come back on for the 48th season. So, pretty exciting for us, and it was a fun watch for the first episode of this season.
Hell yeah, that's really exciting. It's funny you said that. I was telling a client about you and your Survivor proclivities, and I said to her, I was like, yeah, he tells me that the winners' seasons are the best. And her eyes lit up, and she goes, oh, yeah, they are. And I was like, hell yeah, dude, that's what he says. So you are in good company of Survivor enjoyers for sure.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that you could jump into the conversation a little bit with one of your clients. That's pretty funny.
I mean, yeah, because I live under a very curated rock, so just like general things I'm not too good on. I'm happy to hear that Luke Bryan has been serenading your drives home. That's quite fun. He's one of my favorites.
Yeah,
But
Luke
yeah,
Bryan is
wait, what?
Luke Combs, Zach Bryan.
Luke Bryan? Are you kidding me?
I thought you were combining two of the more popular country music folks.
No, dude, to my mind, Luke Bryan is like
Oh, I
the
know who he is.
guy.
Never mind.
Yeah,
I know
just
who.
like thirst trappy country music.
The okay, gotcha. Yeah, the name didn't click. I that's my bad.
Bro, leaving me hanging. Yes,
I'm
yes, I'm
sorry.
making up country music artists for sure.
I thought you were just blending into like in your brain combining two of the more popular recent country music stars, Luke Bryan,
Sure.
little further back with
Okay.
some of his
All right.
hits.
Fair, fair, fair. All right. Damn, dog. I'm
He's
out here
48
getting.
now. I just
Ooh,
looked him
whoa.
up to
Okay.
yeah. I looked it up to make sure I was like not losing my mind, and then I was like, oh yeah, he was on American Idol. Well, he was one of the hosts or the
Right.
judges on American Idol.
Gotcha.
So,
All right. Here we are. Just a couple of old men podcasting. Here we
oh,
go.
my bad
Um,
there.
Well, I've got two visual mediums here for you. I haven't done a good job of listening to music, so I've got two visual mediums for you. My food here for the week, though, I'm sure I've told you about this. I'm Chili Magic's biggest fan. If you've got chili, throw some Chili Magic in. It's a wonderful pot of chili. I have to say every time. So that's my food here for the week. And then my two visual mediums. First, I'll give you the actual movie that I've been watching. One of my favorite just like journalists period does a movie podcast with himself and two of his friends,
Okay.
and they curate it in four movie groups, taking a look at like specific genres.
Okay.
For example, you've got the cosmic horror genre. You watch four of those movies. You've got the 80s
So would that be
vampire flicks.
like Alien and Arrival and things like that?
You got it.
Okay,
Things
cool.
that are like maybe like extraterrestrial or like otherworldly. That's like the cosmic horror genre.
Okay.
Anyway, I've been really enjoying this format of the pod. So I've seen a whole bunch of movies I've never seen before.
Oh, nice.
My horizons are expanding, Jerry. But the one movie in this pod is film noir,
Hmm.
classic genre that I know nothing about. So the first one in that is The Maltese Falcon. So Sarah and I watched that the other night. Humphrey Bogart classic. with a femme fatale and a little detective story going on. So that was wonderful. I've never really consumed anything like that. So excited to get on to some of the other movies in that block. My other visual medium here for you. I've really been keeping an eye on the sales on Steam, and what I've noticed is about every month the Assassin's Creed games go from $60 to $2. So I've decided that I'm just going to play through all the Assassin's Creed games. I'm on Revelations now, which I believe is
Okay.
like the fourth like main title.
Yeah.
So I'm cruising my way through the Assassin's Creed storyline. And I have to say, I'm loving every second of it. It's great. Really enjoying the gameplay. The one that I'm on now, Revelations, it feels like kind of the culmination of that like game line. It's the end of the Ezio trilogy. So I'm just learning all sorts of stuff about history and games from yore. So that's been a fun one. And like I said, that's two visual mediums here for you. I know I'm breaking the rules, but those have been on my mind recently, the Assassin's Creed games. But yeah, that's my flavor of the week for you.
Very cool. I've actually never played the Assassin's Creed games. They are, I think, ones that I would enjoy as well, just the historical aspect, and also some of those games are kind of fun to play through. I've played through a couple of Star Wars ones that are kind of that open world or
Okay.
like storyline a little. Those ones are a little more similar to, I guess, like a Dark Souls kind of game.
Okay.
Um,
Sure.
but yeah, I that may be something to add to my list, and you'll have to let me know if there's some good movie recommendations. I've never watched any noir kind of films either. I think that's a really cool way to expand your horizons with what you're watching and what you know. So yeah, you'll have to let me know if there's anything that you think might tickle my fancy. But with that said, that does bring us to the end of this week's episode covering the Bahrain 2025 preseason testing. Three action packed days of F1 just to whet our appetite for the upcoming season and the Australian Grand Prix that we have coming up on, I believe it's March 14th. That weekend starts. So just about 2 weeks away here from, or just under 2 weeks away from the start of the Formula One season. I couldn't be more excited. I'm just ready for cars on track and racing to get going.
Yeah, I think it's going to be another really exciting season. Looking forward to the 2025 Formula One season. That is all for the Tired Boys podcast on this episode here. Look for us after every single race weekend. Find us now on Amazon Podcasts. Whoa. Find us now on or iTunes Music. Let's go. So anywhere you want to listen, we are there. Tell your friends and family. New episodes after every race weekend. We just want to say thank you very much for tuning in and supporting and enjoying the episode with us.
Yeah, we'll see you guys soon.
Peace out, everyone.